Good morning and welcome to our webinar, or good afternoon, depending where you are. We're just going to give it a couple more minutes, make sure we catch everyone before we start. We are bang on 11 o'clock, so we'll probably give it 1 or 2 more minutes just to make sure we catch everyone. So just bear with me a moment. Okay, looks like we're ticking up with numbers, so that is great. I'm going to give it another 30 seconds. Okay, we're 1 minute past 11, so I'll get started now. So welcome again, everyone, to this webinar, Digital Transformation in Action, hosted by PKF Digital. Thanks very much for joining. If you joined last time, the format's going to be pretty familiar to you. We'll go through a few things. We'll have a little bit of a chat, and at the end, we'll do some questions as well. Again, if you were here last time, what we covered was lessons learned through our experiences of digital transformation. One of the things we got fed back to us was that people wanted to see a bit more specific examples of those type of solutions we've been putting in place. So we'll be doing some of that today. You'll get Phil Broadbury speaking first up. On the call also is myself, Aaron Blair, and Craig Tarr. Together we are the leadership team of PKF Digital, which is a digital transformation company. We're really specifically focused around getting the best out of your Microsoft tools, productivity type solutions with those Microsoft tools. You're going to see a little bit of that when Phil talks just now, and also when Craig does also, you'll see some of those examples. We are recording this webinar, so if you want to go back and watch it later, the link will be sent out, or if anyone's missed it, they can also catch up. If you have any questions during the webinar, please use the Q&A widget or the chat function. We'll respond to those questions if it makes sense in the moment, or towards the end when we have a Q&A. If you need a fuller answer or we run out of time, don't worry, we do collate all those questions and we come back to you on an email or a phone call, whatever makes sense. So enough about that. Let's get into it. So first of all, Phil Broadbury is going to be talking to you. I'll hand over to you, Phil.
Thanks, Aaron, and thanks everyone for your time this morning. Appreciate it. It's a busy old time, so I appreciate you joining this. In our last webinar, as Aaron says, we covered a framework for digital transformation, and that was specifically looking at what we do in PKF in London and Leeds to help generate ideas, to push those ideas through a process into a project list, and then the management of those projects into production. The framework that we really talked about was idea generation sessions, and in those idea generation sessions, we like to share what's been done. So some of the projects, workflows, automations that we've put into the firm in the last quarter. Talk about what's possible with Office 365, and one of our real focuses is to use technology that we already have in the Office 365 platform. So many of you will use in Office 365 for email and for Word, Excel, etc. But not everyone's aware of all of the automation tools that are part of that platform and are just there ready to use. So what we do is share those projects, go into breakout sessions, and use those breakout sessions to generate new ideas. After the last session, we got some feedback around specifics, and it's really a request to show some examples of things that we've done, small solutions, departmental solutions. So what I thought I'd do this morning in the first part of this session was just take you through an example. It is a mock-up. It's not our live system that I'm sharing with you, and it's just a quick mock-up that I put together yesterday that focused on compliance, and specifically around data breach compliance within the firm. I took that one as an example because as a process, it's pretty generic. It's the kind of thing that we can apply to many different scenarios. So I thought we'd try this one. It starts off with a Microsoft form and then a workflow behind that to push a record into a into a register, into a document library for ongoing processing. So what I was going to do, I'm going to pop in the chat window a link to a Microsoft form. As I say, it's not a production form. This is a cut down example. I've made it a public form, so if you deploy these things within your company, you can deploy it within the organization, and then it can automatically know who's filled it in and pull that information off. But I put a quick sample together. If you get a moment, you click on that link, a form will come up. You can put some test data in there. It doesn't go anywhere, and I'll clear it all out straight after the session. So let me share my screen, and we'll walk through what we've got on here. So if I share my screen, we'll just get a plain SharePoint site. It's a communication site that's just set up in a test environment, and within this site, within this Office 365 environment, we've got Microsoft Forms. Now, Microsoft Forms typically is turned off by default, but it can be turned on per user or for a whole organization. And it enables you just to create very quick forms. So this is the one that I shared with you. If I click on that, we're in the designer mode, so we can see we've got a few different fields on here. If I wanted to add new things on the form, I just choose what I want to add and add those in. There's some themes and styles that we can use, and it can be previewed so we can see it on how it looks on a mobile device or how it looks on the computer. So it's really a quick, low code, simple online form, secure in terms of it uses HTTPS, so secure data collection, and that data is stored where you tell it to store it. So by default, that would be saved in your Office 365 OneDrive, but you can tell it to store that data in a particular team or particular place. So all very controlled. So that form gets posted, and then what we want to do with that is push that into a secure area for the data protection team to work on it. So what we've got is a team. So I've got Microsoft Teams here, and what I've got in here is a team called Data Protection, so I can really control who's in that team just using standard functions. At the moment, it's just me in this example, and I've got three channels. So I've got general, I've got a data breach register, and a notifications channel. I quite like these notification channels just for prompts, because it's just using out-of-the-box functionality where we can just use channel notifications. And I use this in production to just tell me if there's new issues that I need to pick up on, or and direct me off to the relevant register. So in this data breach register, behind here, we have a SharePoint site. So SharePoint underpins Microsoft Teams generally. So we've got a SharePoint site underneath here, and in there, I've got a document library. So these are all of the responses that come through. So anyone that completes that form, it will push that information into this register for me to then go on and follow it up. Now, the glue between the form and this register is Flow, or the Power Automate service. In Power Automate, you can create a number of flows. I use the term sort of low tech or low code quite a lot, because this is Microsoft's push to get non-developers putting solutions together. And what we've got here is 5 steps. So the first step is the trigger, and the trigger is when a new form is completed. So that's linked to the form that I shared with you. And whenever there's a completed form, it will move to the second step, and it will grab the data from that form. What it then does is create a record from a template. So it creates a new document from a template in the particular register that we want to save to, and it updates that record with the information from the form. It then posts a message to Teams to say a new record's been posted and saved, and that prompts the data protection team to dive in and have a look at that. A number of other functions could be added to this. So it's just a point and click function to add a new action. And those can integrate into Outlook if you want to send emails to people. I try and avoid that because we all get enough emails already. You can link into third-party systems. So we've got a couple that update our Salesforce system with information that we've collected. Doesn't have to be through Microsoft Forms. It could equally be a trigger when a new email arrives from a particular sender or a new file arrives in a particular folder. The triggers are very adaptable. So what we end up with, and thanks Craig and Aaron for popping a couple of new ones in there. So what we end up with is this document library, and it's got a series of Word documents in when anyone's completed that form. So if I open one of these up, I'm literally just opening a Word document. What you'll see is the Word document is populated by whatever was filled in on that form. So I've got a data breach report form here. This is the information that was typed in, and then the data protection team would then fill in the rest of the details. So let's pretend that I've gone off and I've had a look at this one, and perhaps this is a particularly serious one that does impact the rights and freedoms of of individuals. And I might say, right, I do want to report this one to the ICO. I need to get that one reported. So I can just use this as a regular Word document. So I can add extra information on, attach in any copy and paste information I want, images, etc. So it then lives as a permanent record of this issue or this event. So I've updated that record. I've got a couple of other fields on here, status, the overview of the text, whether it's been reported. You can see that one that I updated is now reportable, yes. That would then trigger a series of other actions that the team need to pick up on. As it's SharePoint and these are columns in SharePoint, we can use those to create different views or different alerts to notify people if things need to be followed up or need to produce a board report or something similar. So those views are all available on the drop down at the top right. So I could have a view for records with actions. So these are the two records in the system where actions are outstanding, I need to follow up, or perhaps I just want to look at records awaiting, so things that have been logged that I haven't progressed. So we use these quite a lot in the firm for all sorts of different scenarios, whether it be incoming email, whether it be someone completing a form, someone completing something in a Power App, or just a document arriving to a particular location, and then process that to push that information into the right place so it can then be followed up. Once it's followed up, save that as a record in the system with the built-in record management features, and then we've got a solid register that we can use for all of our board reporting, divisional reporting, and indeed auditor or regulator compliance purposes. So this particular example, pretty straightforward, the kind of thing that you put together within a couple of hours. So I did this one yesterday, just as a quick example. In production or in a live scenario, you would tend to think that these things need, an hour or so of discussion to confirm the requirements, a couple of hours to document that and get that confirmed as a brief. Then you'd probably say you're looking at 4 to 8 hours to actually put it together, do some development testing on it, get it documented, hand it over, produce the necessary FAQ pages that you might want. So even though it might take an hour or two to put something together, you would typically say that these things would, a day or two to do properly, and have documented and supported. So with these kind of functions, and these are the kind of ideas that we use in our innovation sessions and automation sessions, we share these with team members and ask them to think about processes that they might feel we could do better with through automation, use of templates, and use of the Office 365 platform. So what we end up with here, pretty easy method for staff or customers or external contacts to post in information, a secure area for particular team members to process those matters, additional business rules that we can add in, whether that be for reporting, for alerts, for approvals, and a solid register with full version control, items saved as records in the system, which we can then use for follow-up and for compliance purposes. So that was my quick example, Aaron, sort of based on feedback we had from the last session around a specific example of going from forms through Flow into document libraries.
Yeah, I love it. It's really looks simple, and I'm impressed you managed to put that all together in 2 hours, Phil. But you know, I think that's one of the things that we find with those what you call low code or no code solutions from Microsoft is they are super fast to put together, and most of the work goes into that requirements gathering and making sure, you know, what you're getting out of it is what you need. The actual putting it together is pretty much drag and drop sort of functionality. So even if you don't have developers on staff, whilst a developer can do that a lot faster, you know, I would encourage anyone who's listening in, if you've got access to Power Automate, go and have a look at some of those things you can put together. I promise you it's simpler than you think it is. One of the things that kind of pops out to me, Phil, is you were showing some of the different views you can do to sort of have a look at that data, you know, yourself or for the data protection team. How else could we look at that if you had, you know, the executive team saying, well, actually, we want to track this week by week, month by month, and make sure, you know, we're not suddenly getting overloaded with these issues. Could we dashboard that information somehow, make it that, you know, if there was an interested party, they could just go in and have a look at a nice little graph or something whenever they want?
Yeah, I guess there's a couple of answers to that. I mean, there's quite often sort of a low-tech answer and a sort of a higher tech answer. But from a low-tech point of view, we can use views, we can style those views. So have a subset of information that we can maybe display in a component on an intranet or a page as part of a Microsoft team. Something that we do a lot of is using Power BI, and Power BI can be pointed directly at document libraries or SharePoint lists that can create that. Well, you mentioned dashboards, you know, a dashboard function, and then either publish that into the Power BI service. I guess there's a point to note in there in that you can do that. You can create those Power BI dashboards without any charge using Power BI desktop. When it comes to sharing dashboards, the low-tech way is sharing the actual Power BI file with people. The trouble with that is that they then get the complete data set and all the business transformation rules that you've done within Power BI. So you can share the Power BI file with others, but if you publish it to the Power BI online service, there's an additional license fee incurred. If you've got the E5 license, I believe it's included, but if you've got E3, which tends to be quite common, then there's I think it's $6 a month add-on for each user. The nice thing about the Power BI online service is very good for scheduling updates, for allowing people to create their own views on data that you've already prepared for them, and you can create a nice, clean, transformed, filtered data set for people to use and create those dashboards or reports or notifications from. So a couple of different answers in there, but one thing that I've been quite impressed with in the last sort of year or two is the amount of styling you can do within libraries themselves. So I did some simple styling in that example of if it was a reportable, then put it in red, in bold, and put some red lines around it so it sort of jumps out. But you can do much more sophisticated styling, and that probably starts to go into the not heavily technical, but more in style sheets and starting going towards what a typical web developer would do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, great. And the other thing that kind of pops into my mind is, as someone who's run support teams before, and probably Craig has as well, so I'm going to direct this question at him as sort of the more technical person, is who supports this, and what happens if it breaks? How do you know if your flow breaks? Someone reports, a pretty important GDPR breach. This is something you want to know about straight away. Can it break? Can a flow fail and we don't find out about that? Someone thinks they've reported it and we never know. So
yeah, most certainly. And I think that's a major concern when it comes to Office 365 and getting that visibility around the reports. So like Phil said, a high code, low code answer here. Firstly, any flow that falls over, it sends the flow creator an email. Now, generally, we find best practice, you share your flow with an IT team, so then they also get the notification. But in the case where, for instance, a workflow falls over or a Power Automate flow falls over, and the user might be away, no one knows about it. What we've done is we've actually created steps within the flow where it tracks any errors in the flow and then writes that to a dashboard, exactly like Phil's dashboard. And then you're seeing it from a service center, an IT service center. You can actually see any of the issues that might be cropping up. And they could be anything. It could be integration. It might be that there's a service that's fallen over in 365, or it might be that you're talking to a SQL database and that SQL database is down. So we can pick up those nuances.
Okay, so it comes back to a bit of governance there, is making sure that, Phil talked about documenting the solution and making sure people are following that process. You don't want shadow IT rogue people going off creating super important business processes without telling anybody about it.
One thing I'll probably chip in quickly on that, Aaron, as well. First of all, apologies. I meant to share the link to that form and I didn't. So I just popped it in the chat just in case anyone does want to click on it, and I'll maybe if we've got time at the end, I'll go back and see what's gone in. But from a low tech point of view on that point, something that I do as part of a control is that every single form that's completed, that data is stored effectively in an Excel where I want to save it, so I can always go back to that. And just cross-reference that those have been fed in. So if I happen to miss a notification that a flow's failed, I can go back to the actual underlying, the original core data, and just double check that those have fed through. So there's some manual controls that you can add in, as well as some of the automated points that Craig talks about.
Okay, yeah, great. One of the things I wanted to pick up, Phil, just is on what you spoke about, idea generation, which is one of the things that I know you do, and I think is a really amazing tool for, really managing to transform your business. Do you find that people get really engaged? Do you get good turn up for these idea generation sessions?
We do. Yeah, we do. We do them quarterly. There's always a good turnout there. I think one of the challenges, I suppose, with maintaining that is ensuring that we always go back with things done in the previous quarter that tick things off the list. So after the first 2 quarterly sessions that we'd done, we'd had 30 ideas submitted through the process. We'd reviewed those and taken 10 of them forward, and we delivered 4. So we also share that information with our divisional leaders quarterly updates. So we tell people, give them a quick overview of what's on the ideas planner. We use planner as a board for what ideas have been logged. So we share with the divisional leaders, what ideas have been generated. At the start of every session, we'd show people what's been done and what's new, and refer back to that list, because you don't really want to have breakouts every quarter where you're asking people to submit ideas and they say, well, can you get on with the first 10 that I sent you last time? Yeah, you can't do everything. There's not enough time in the day to manage everything that comes through. But I think as long as people are seeing some progress and some movement, you can maintain the interest and maintain the attendance levels. I think it can get dangerous when you're just showing people new stuff that Microsoft have pumped out every 90 days, because it can be a bit overwhelming. Yeah, well attended. We do have other sources of projects that come to us. We might get a divisional lead or partner, senior manager saying, can we get this done? I've got justification for it. I've got budget for it. Get it done. So we have a few different inputs, but I think the idea generation session so far has been really successful for us.
Great. Yeah, I think it's a wonderful idea, and if people who can come up with their own ideas see it developed, obviously they're much more likely to engage with that and then engage with the whole process. All right, super. So I want to move on now to Craig's demonstration, which he's going to cover quite a bit in depth on something called adaptive cards. If you don't know what adaptive cards are, you're about to find out how these can be used across different platforms. He's also going to touch on some of the newer concepts from Microsoft Viva Connections. If you haven't heard of Viva Connections yet, you probably will, and Craig will touch on that a little bit. Just to forewarn you, although he's sounding very good right now, Craig's voice has been a bit of a problem recently, so he actually pre-recorded his session just to make sure that he doesn't suffer a bout of coughing in the middle of it. So if there are questions, we will handle those at the end, not during the middle of Craig's session. And the video may just degrade a little bit because it's a streamed video, but bear with us while we do that. Over to you, Craig.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. So just in terms of the session, while I'm setting up on my side here, this basically extends from Phil's discussion to find practical uses of the tools within Microsoft 365. And as Phil says, we have these sessions, but people don't necessarily know what they've got in their box. They know that they've got Microsoft 365, but they don't necessarily know about the tools, which is why I want to talk about adaptive cards, which is a great tool that is very versatile and can be used right throughout your organization. It's important to understand that we're in a complex environment now where some are using browsers, some are using desktop apps, some on phones, and people want visual information and they want information that's pertinent to them as an individual. So those are the concepts that we're going to be covering. So I'm just going to share my screen now, and please bear with me. I am going to kick off the process.
That's not playing for me, Craig.
Thanks, Oren.
Here we go.
Hi, I'm Craig. I'm going to be taking you through your demo examples today. So we're starting off with adaptive cards and understanding exactly what an adaptive card is. If you've never seen one before, I'm quickly going to just show you. I'm here over at adaptivecards.io. This is the Microsoft site where you can get samples of different adaptive cards as well as design your own. And an adaptive card is a little widget like this one over the side here. And what that widget allows you to do is show information that can be formatted, so title, image, some body, as well as have functionality like a button or even some controls. So a drop down here where we've got year and or a calendar picker and a comment. Now, what makes this widget special is that it's all defined by a template, and that template for business users you don't need to know about. It's basically what's called JSON, and it's a syntax that defines what this component should look like. So as an example here, we've got a text block where we've got medium, bold, or weight title, and the text is the title. So you can assume that that's the title there. This template is then populated with data. So at runtime, that data can be different. And that data comes through also as JSON, and it creates what's a very variable widget. So in this case, this is an example of an interactive widget where you need to fill in some dates and a comment. But they can be informational type widgets, so like a flight itinerary and showing you where all of your starts and stops are, or they can be amalgamation of both of them. But for every type of design here, you can put in imagery, you can put in borders, you can put in timelines, you can put in whatever really you want within that widget to make it work for you. So with that in place, let's jump over to one of our demos. Okay, so let's start off with our first scenario. So we're going to look at adaptive cards and their use in multiple channels. And what I mean by channels here, we're going to be looking at Teams and Outlook and how you can use an adaptive card in each of those technologies. So in our use case, an employee arrives at the office and they need to fill out one of those pesky COVID forms. Everyone has that slip of paper sitting at the front desk. Not the most effective way to deal with the workflow processes and the recording of data. So what we're going to do is we're going to provide an adaptive card, and that uses either granted access or denied access. And once that's done, a manager who might be on the road gets an email to confirm whether that they need to override a test if it has failed. So let's actually have a look at that process, and we're going to start off in a place that you might not expect. We're going to start off in Flow. Okay, so here we are in Power Automate, and the reason we're here is we wanted to get rid of that form at the front desk. So what we've done is we've geofenced an office, and with that we've set up a region around the office where you cross over a boundary. When you cross over that boundary, it gets your profile information, it looks at the location, and it figures out whether you're going in or out of the boundary. If you're going out of the boundary, you're leaving the office and it'll send you a notification. Otherwise, if you're coming into the office, it's going to send a COVID form directly to your phone to fill in, so you don't have that piece of paper sitting at the front desk. So I have previously run an example here, so I'm going to kick that off, and we're going to see this within Teams. So let me go across to Teams, and I have now entered into our office location, and you'll see here an adaptive form. That adaptive card will pull out information relating to me. So we saw earlier that information will change depending on who's coming in into the office. When I click through onto my form, I can fill in any of my questionnaires. Have you had a cough? Have you had a fever? What's your temperature? Take the temperature. Oh, it's 38 degrees. Next. It's got all of my contact information, especially if that information needs to be updated, they need to contact you, etc. Submit that information, and that goes off to SharePoint, says thank you for submitting your confirmation. And within Flow, it assesses my application and says, oh, sorry, your access has been denied and your status has been escalated. Please go home and be safe. So let's jump back onto Flow, and we can actually see where this has gone. Within our Flow, it's come down to our COVID form, it's paused the response, it's seen that my temperature's over, it's logged in access denied into SharePoint, and it's also sent off an email to my manager to say that there's been a COVID scare. So let's actually have a look at that email, and let's jump over to Outlook here. Do a send and receive. And here's my email coming through. Now, what you'll see here is that in my email itself, there is another adaptive card. And here it's noting who the person is who's failed, what their question answers were. I can see that their temperature's over. If I wanted to, I could override this risk. So let's say they had a cough or snivel or something of the sort, but they've been perfectly fine. Otherwise, I might say, you know what, I override this risk, or decline to them access into the building at all. So now I've got this adaptive card that's available in Outlook. It's not just in Teams, it's not just in SharePoint, it's actually showing you a adaptive card within Outlook as well. Okay, so that was our first scenario, showing you the adaptability of the cards by using them in multiple channels, like in an email and in Teams. We're now going to look at how you could use an adaptive card in SharePoint as an example. So here we use the SharePoint framework to develop and utilize cards, but we're going to use them in a Teams perspective. And our use case here is that an employee comes onto the intranet, and that could be via SharePoint or it could be via their mobile device. Everyone now with collaboration is using Teams, and therefore we want an adaptive interface and dashboard so that users can see what is pertinent to them and can see it in these multiple devices. So what we're going to show here is,
apologies all, we're just going to see if we can restart that share without the issues with the video. So Jenna, if you would please try and share from your side and see if that can resolve the issue. Craig is sitting in South Africa, so it could potentially be an issue with the speed of the internet.
sorry, did it stop there?
Yeah, Craig, the video is probably looking okay for you, but for everyone else, it's not
okay. Sorry, at which point did we knock off?
Okay, so we were just looking at, I think, about the third slide in.
Okay, great. I'll take over from there. Apologies if my voice does not handle, but I'll kick off.
Yeah, Craig, what probably I'd suggest is, given the time, maybe if you just unfortunately your screen share is quite blurry, but if you maybe could show a simple card just of your screen.
No
problem.
problem.
Out of time if we start again, and then we can share it with people after.
Okay, great. So just in terms of the cards, within SharePoint itself, you can start utilizing the cards on your intranet. So within the intranet itself, if we drop down, you've got all of your links to different locations, your news, as well as information around events, etc. But this is where these dashboard cards come in. And typically, sorry, I wasn't ready for the demo here. But within these cards, these are adaptive cards that we can introduce into SharePoint itself. So for instance here, if we needed a check-in to check in when you are when you're in the office or not, an adaptive card is available for you to fill in your relevant details, capture the dates at which point you're checking in, and whether you're going to be working remotely or from the office. That being said, you've also got your self-declarations where you can fill in your vaccination information and COVID information. And once that's been submitted, the information will then point to a list and a calendar, so everyone can see your availability within the your calendar. So I'm just doing a quick refresh here. So one of the things that we had on an intranet is you've always got these group calendars and events and items, but what about items that might be specific to me as an individual? So let's say, as an example, I wanted to audience target a adaptive card so that it showed only information that was relevant to the individual who signed in. So as an example here, we connect to the Microsoft Graph, and we can show any of your events straight out of Outlook within the intranet itself. But let's take something that is more specific to a department. Your IT department is looking after Microsoft 365, and very regularly they have service health checks. And if there's anything wrong with any of the services, they report that to you, but it's reported via the admin site or via email. Well, for a IT team, they probably want to have that available to them on a dashboard. So here we've built an example of an adaptive card that reads through the Microsoft Graph any of the service health. And if we go and have a look at the details here, we can see any of the issues that are currently on the Microsoft 365 environment. So I might be having a problem with Exchange, and I want to go and interrogate that. I can actually see what the two problems are that are currently on the Microsoft 365 environment. And if I wanted to, I can click through on more details. Now, it's very important to understand that this information would change depending on what device you're using. So we have the ability to set up Viva connections. Viva connections is a way to show you your information within Teams and not just within SharePoint. So a lot of the discussion that we have is around, well, is SharePoint still relevant as an intranet? And my argument would always be, yes, it is, because Teams is driven from SharePoint. Even if, whether you know it or not, every time you create a team, it's creating a site on SharePoint. It stores all the information on SharePoint. So SharePoint is just as relevant today as it was prior to Teams. In terms of setting up Viva Connections, though, this is specifically an app that it allows you to set up to show your SharePoint information and your intranet information within Teams. And one of the components is this dashboard. Now, if I go into edit mode here, you'll see that there's a mobile view and there's a desktop view. So in my mobile view, I can see how this app would look within my device. So when I go into Teams, whether I'm on an Android device, if I'm on a iOS device, it doesn't matter. It's going to get rid of all of my other intranet details, and it's going to show me my dashboard that is applicable to me. So as an individual who needs to check in and check out of the office, I'll have that component, and it works in exactly the same way as it would have on the desktop. If I'm in the, if I want to show my own upcoming events, it'll show it to me in the app. But quite importantly, where you've got something like service health, well, your general staff don't need to know about this. But when you can build these components out with adaptive cards, you can audience target them. So if you've got an IT team, you set in the IT team, and only the IT team sees that widget. So these adaptive cards become extremely useful just in building out applications on top of SharePoint and within Teams itself. So let's jump across to Teams, and I'll show you the experience from within Teams. So within Teams, you've got Viva Connections, and clicking on Viva Connections will take me through to exactly the same site that we were just showing you. So in terms of that site, we've got all of our componentry here that you can interact with from Teams as well. But also Viva Connections monitors your entire site and looks at things like news articles and events and any of your global navigation. And if I click on the Viva Connections, it shows me that information so that I can move to it in a swift fashion. It also shows me all of the sites that I follow and all of the news that's aggregated right across my organization. So any of the sites that I belong to where there are news web parts, it will bring that news through. So whether it's coming from the home page or from a team site, pulls all of that information together for you. The only difference then is obviously the ability to view this in a mobile device. So let me try and share that with you. And I'm going to share my screen here. So just bear with me. Okay, I'm showing you my mobile device here and using a screen share technology so that you can see this. It's a little bit slow, but you'll notice now I open up Teams and I've got the same functionality in Teams to show me my Viva connections. But you'll notice here, it's now showing me an app where it's only showing me the items that are relevant to me. So if I wanted to check in to work, I've got a pre-built form that works dynamically within Teams. So it's an app within my mobile device where I can provide the same functionality that I'm providing in SharePoint. As well, if I wanted to go and see the current issues on the intranet or in 365, all of that same experience that moves across from one device to the other. At the same time here within our team, we've got any feeds around any of the news articles, as well as resources, which gives me that same link from SharePoint, where I've got access to all of my information that's sitting on the intranet. So in using adaptive cards here, we've built a dashboard that is very user-friendly and very capable both in capturing data and in visualizing data, and is easily transmitted both to a mobile device, to a desktop app, or even to a browser. On that note, sorry again about the sharing. Amazingly, my voice held together there, but I'm going to pass back to Aaron for any questions.
Thank you, Craig. Yes, apologies for that. Unfortunately, the testing earlier had worked, and of course it doesn't in the live, which is fairly typical. So we'll come into questions. If anyone's got questions, there is a Q&A app at the bottom there. I've got a couple through now, and if there's any others that come through afterwards, please feel free to email us for questions as well. And the first question here is pretty typical one. Around Microsoft licenses. So it's what Microsoft licenses are required for setting up these solutions. Well, I'll ask you, Phil, for your particular one there with sort of Microsoft Forms. I think you touched on it, that's just Microsoft Office Suite, Office 365 Suite.
Yeah, I mean, Microsoft licensing seems to be a bit of a black art at times, and they haven't necessarily made things simpler lately. But generally speaking, I find companies that I work with will license using the Office 365 E3 license. That's the one that gives Word, Excel, PowerPoint, as well as email, SharePoint, etc. Now that license comes with tools like Flow for doing the automations, Power Apps for putting small apps together, the adaptive card framework that Craig talked about, Power BI Desktop, well, that's a free download anyway. But the E3 does not come with Power BI Online, as I mentioned earlier. Microsoft then introduced, so the Office 365 E3, then introduced the Microsoft E3 license, which adds some features onto there. So generally speaking, the E3 license is pretty common. For those of you that have moved to telephony in Microsoft Teams, you'll probably have the E5. If you've got the E5, you'll get a bunch of other options. The Microsoft E5 license includes the Power BI Online service and some additional capacity on some of the Power Platform. So with the E3, I'm losing my voice now. With the E3, you can certainly do all the things that I showed earlier.
Yeah, great. And if you're not aware, the prices are going up in about a week. So, it's more important than ever to get the most out of what you're already paying for. So if you're already paying for an Office 365 licensing, it's well worth looking into what else you can do with that to get the most out of that investment. Craig, what about adaptive cards and Viva connections? Is that included as well?
Yeah, most certainly. So that comes as part of your package. The adaptive cards is obviously a development type tool, but when with the use of Viva connections is part of Teams and SharePoint Online.
Thanks, Craig. Okay, so another question here is probably something we covered more in the previous webinar as well, was how do I get, what's the best way to get started with my own digital transformation? And I think, Phil, that's probably a good question for you. You've talked about having ideas generation and showing what you've done, but how did you get started? What did you do first? Oh, you're on mute there, Phil.
Sorry, that was to save everyone from me having a short coughing fit on the phone. Where did we start first? And trying to think what the very first Power Platform project we did was. We did quite a lot of work early on with appraisals. We've got quite a specific process for trainees and qualified staff going through appraisal processes. So we used a pretty similar service to what I shared earlier, but it has approvals and it changes the permissions on documents depending on whether it's been submitted for manager comments or gone off for second review, etc. Now we did that really on the back of knowing that SharePoint is a document management system with all of the capabilities of a document management system, and Flow being able to change permissions. So with that kind of nugget, we sort of thought, well, if we can change permissions on documents, we can save all of these appraisals being emailed around and so many versions of them being scattered everywhere, and just put them all in a central place, and then change the permissions so people can only see what they're supposed to see. That proved to be a very nice framework. And of course, once we'd started with that, you then start saying, well, oh, okay, well, we can get the flow to talk to SharePoint, to Salesforce. We can get the flows to talk to an SQL database. So if we can pull data out of an SQL database, we can do things like a new client has been added to our practice management system, therefore trigger these events to happen. So the various compliance and onboarding procedures can start. So as soon as we started, you then start seeing, oh, well, if we've got that, then can we do this and can we do that? We've probably, I mean, in the firm, and when I say the firm, I'm talking about PKF Littlejohn, which is a predominantly audit tax practice with about 400 staff. We've probably got now about 30 to 40 different processes running on Flow, and there's a real mix of things being triggered by incoming emails from certain clients, from certain documents arriving, forms being completed, apps being submitted, all sorts of different triggers. I've not yet got into triggers based on Twitter notifications or LinkedIn messages or that kind of thing, but I'm led to believe that's quite an exciting source of doing things, but I haven't gone there yet. But yeah, sorry, long answer and conscious of time, so apologies, Sam.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Thanks, Phil. I mean, I think it's about starting with something that is a problem, talking to people in the business, and it's a lot of what we actually do is going in and talking to businesses and saying, what is a problem? What are people struggling with? And it's often the small little admin things that we can start to build a process around, start to help people, make it a bit easier, a little less admin heavy, a little less paper based, that really starts to drive that innovation. Once you get one there, as you've said with your ideas generation, people start to think, hang on a minute, I can apply this to another thing I'm doing. I can apply this to something else that's a pain, and that we can make it better using technology that we're already paying for as well. All right, so that's it. I don't have any other questions. So just to wrap it up, thanks everyone for joining. Really appreciate you all taking the time to join us and staying throughout the whole thing. Just to give you a little brief overview, obviously you've heard a few people talking today, and together we are PKF Digital. And what we're really doing is running digital transformation project offices. That's coming in and talking to you about what you're having problems with and finding solutions, assessing where you are, where do you want to be, and helping you develop, support, and build out those topics, as well as, one of the future webinars is around the security of Office 365. Do we trust Microsoft to look after what we're putting in here? Phil's talking about pretty sensitive data when we're talking about GDPR breaches, and how much do we trust Microsoft, and should we, or are there things we should be looking at? So that's something we'll also cover in a future webinar. As we wrap up, if anyone is keen to learn more about what PKF Digital does, or have a chat to us, pick our brains on what you're going through at the moment and what you might need help with, then please send out an email. There will be a follow-up to this to everybody with the contact details there, and as I said, the recordings. So please feel free to reach out and have a chat to us. Otherwise, thanks very much, everyone, and have a great day.
Cheers, Aaron.